everyone?
Yes.
1. This talk is divided into 8 sections. They're pretty short. This one is the shortest. 2. Here's a story. Some of you may have heard it before. It's a classic Jewish tale that's been told in many versions. This version is from a story collection by Rabbi Ed Feinstein. A rabbi once asked his students, "How do we know when the night has ended and the day has begun?" One student offered an answer. "Rabbi, when I look out at the fields and I can distinguish between my field and the field of my neighbor, that's when the night has ended and the day has begun." A second student offered an answer. "Rabbi, when I see an animal in the distance and I can tell what kind of animal it is, whether a cow, a horse, or a sheep, that's when the night has ended and the day has begun." A third student offered yet another answer. "Rabbi, when I see a flower and I can make out the colors of the flower, whether they are red or yellow or blue, that's when the night has ended and day has begun." Each answer brought a sadder, more severe frown to the rabbi's face, until finally he shouted, "No, not one of you understands. You only divide. You divide your field from your neighbor's field. You distinguish one kind of animal from another. You separate one color from all the others. Is that all we can do? Divide, separate, split the world into pieces? Isn't the world broken enough? No, my students, it's not that way. Not that way at all." The shocked students looked into the sad face of their rabbi. One of them ventured, "Then, Rabbi, tell us, how do we know that night has ended and day has begun?" The rabbi stared back into the faces of his students, and with a voice suddenly gentle and imploring, he responded, "It is when you look into the face of the person who is beside you, and you can see that that person, whoever it is your brother or your sister. Because if you cannot do this, then no matter what time it is still night." 3. You only divide, says the rabbi. I want to talk about one of the ways we tend to practice division. I'm not talking about math problems here, but I am talking about a problem. We divide people. We tend to separate them into opposing categories, and here are 2 of the most significant of those categories. Neighbors, that is, people we know or at least are acquainted with, people who are familiar to us. Neighbors on the one hand, and on the other, strangers, that is, everybody else, everybody who's not our neighbor. This way of dividing humanity goes way back. The founders of the world's great religions, great religious traditions, all talk about neighbors and strangers. And all of these traditions make love of neighbor a fundamental principle. Many of us were taught, love your neighbor as yourself, an injunction which first appears in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. It's not necessarily an easy command to follow. I mean, are we supposed to care about people we know but don't like? The answer, according to these religious traditions, is yes. But here's the thing that especially interests me, and I hope will interest you. These traditions also teach that we should love the others, those who are not our neighbors, that we should care about strangers. But wait, how can we care, genuinely care, about people we don't even know? People toward whom we tend, in fact, to be at best indifferent and at worst fearful and hostile. Care about strangers, about them, us? Yes, say these religious traditions. And I'll speak now only of the two traditions with which I'm personally most familiar. Care about strangers? Yes, say the Hebrew Scriptures. Indeed, in the 5 books of the Torah, the command to love our neighbor occurs exactly once. In those same 5 books, the command to love the stranger occurs 36 times. Does this mean that caring for the stranger is more important than caring for our neighbors? I don't think so. What it does mean, I think, is that caring for strangers is harder than caring for neighbors. It's something we need to keep being encouraged toward. Care about strangers? Yes, says the Christian New Testament, when, with the words June read, Jesus promises an eternal reward to those who make the stranger welcome. 4. In 530 of the Common Era, so 1,500 years ago, a man named Benedict wrote a rule for monasteries, places apart from the world where people would live lives dedicated to the praise of God through prayer and work. This rule has become one of the most important and influential of the world's spiritual documents. So it may be a bit surprising that it contains a whole chapter on how to answer the door. According to the rule, as summarized by Nancy Taylor, at the sound of a football, or a horsehoof, or a knock, no matter what time of day or night, the doorman scurries to the door, flings it open, and cries out, "Thank God you've come." The Rule of Benedict was written at a time of great social migration and personal peril, long before there were such places as campgrounds or motels. Imagine yourself a poor traveler in those days, a stranger who knows nobody in a foreign country. After a long day of walking, you come to a monastery. You knock on its wooden door, and a man you've never seen before quickly opens it and greets you not only as if you were expected, but as if your arrival were something the community was eagerly awaiting. Thank God you've come. In the words of Joan Chittister, who is herself a Benedictine nun, that kind of welcome is a tonic for human separations, for the kind of darkness that keeps us from recognizing in the other our brother or sister. Sister Joan goes on, Benedict takes in the poor and the pilgrim, the young and the old, the rich and the deprived, the ones of his own family of faith and the passers-by. And every guest is received with the same warmth and the same care, the same dignity and the same attention. The Benedictine community was to be, again in Sister Joan's words, a place where the truth of the oneness of all things shatters barriers, a point where all the differences of the world meet and melt. A place, in other words, where neighbor and stranger belong together. Yesterday, 12 of the girls in this room, including June and Anna, experienced just such a place. 5. Yesterday afternoon, the service team spent 2.5 hours at a Benedictine monastery, benefiting from the very kind of generous hospitality that Benedict's rule provides for. Starting with the Latin greeting I received from a nun who answered my ring on the doorbell. Deo gratias, she said. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God that Westover is here. We returned the nuns' hospitality by, among other things, helping them harvest from the monastery garden leeks, beans, hot peppers, spinach, arugula. We also prepared leeks and hot peppers for the kitchen. We weeded a lettuce bed and some other activities. This is what impressed me so much about yesterday afternoon. In spite of the fact that these nuns had never met most of us, and therefore might easily have considered us strangers, not for one moment were we strangers in that monastery. Division simply didn't happen there. And openness came from our direction too. Some of the girls on the trip had never met a nun before, so nuns themselves were pretty strange to some of us. I loved hearing one of those girls describe Mother Angele and Mother Margaret Georgina and Mother Scholastica and Sister Evangelista as new friends on the bus ride back to school. 6. Of course, the guest in a Benedictine monastery benefits from the community's generous hospitality, but the care the community gives the stranger also has an important benefit for the community itself. And that goes for any community. It goes for this community. In the words of Joan Chittister that June read, "When I take strange people and strange ideas into my heart, I am beginning to shape a new world." Sister Joan expands on the Benedictine doorman's greeting this way. Thank God you've come. Thank God that someone has come to stretch our minds and souls. Thank God that someone has come to shake us out of our complacency. Thank God that someone has come to prod us beyond ourselves. The monastic community's intellectual, moral, and spiritual growth, this is the gift of the stranger whom it welcomes. Speaking not of a monastery, but of this community, Mrs. Polina made a similar point in her convocation address a few weeks ago. The new faces we bring to our student body, to our faculty, and to our staff enrich us exponentially, she said. Yes, this community's intellectual, moral, and spiritual growth, this community's part in shaping a new world, these depend on the strange people and strange ideas we take into our heart. 7. I want to back up for a moment and say just a word about the service team. It's a particularly spirited and courageous team this term. The team's mission is to take our community's openness to strangers on the road. 5 afternoons a week, these girls take into their heart inner city school kids, sick and elderly nursing home residents, Special Olympics bowlers, and young horseback riders with disabilities. On your behalf, and alongside the community service projects that you all join in, these girls do their best to give the people they encounter what Frederick Buechner calls, in the words we all read together, the love that speaks the holy and healing word, which is, stranger who is no stranger, I wish you well. 8. What a wonderful symbol the Westover Lantern is for the kind of place we want this school to be. The kind of place where there is always enough light for us to recognize in one another and in strangers, however strange or distant they may be, to recognize in one another and in strangers our brothers and sisters.